Hi, I'm Alex.
And I'm Eddie.
Welcome to the 18th episode of Catch 52, a politics podcast brought to you by WDSR Duquesne Student Radio.
We are now 34 weeks away from Inauguration Day 2021, and the last week has been a pretty consistently themed week, following a couple of pivotal race relation moments, I guess is the best way to say it.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It has been exhausting, to say the least. Although I feel like every week is really exhausting. This one has been particularly dynamic, I guess.
Yeah. So in terms of more national and pressing news, on top of the Ahmaud Arbery case that's been slowly gaining more and more traction, we have another case of police violence in George Floyd, who was knelt on for 7 minutes by a police officer after being detained on suspect for a forgery case, which is,
knelt on is
objectively wrong in every manner of the way. They're like the incredible thing about this case in particular is there is very, very little fighting about whether or not this was wrong. In almost every police violence case you see, at least some fighting between left and right as to whether the cop was just trying to exercise their, duties. But in this one, everyone is admitting it's wrong.
First of all, saying that he knelt on his neck is kind of putting it
lightly.
He was choking the guy out with his knee, which is something that I didn't even know was possible.
It was the knee to the carotid artery. Yeah. So it cut off the blood flow to his brain. Yeah. So by kneeling on the neck, I mean in a way that is lethal and can kill someone in 5 minutes. And he was there for 7 minutes. So
we have people who I went to high school with, people I'm friends with, follow on social media who usually are not politically oriented creatures. If they are sometimes even on the right. I know some of my friends on the right also have been tweeting, Instagramming, posting, you name it. You see Justice for George, Black Lives Matter content. There's been stuff that was uploaded. There was I guess you could call it, what started off with a peaceful protest became kind of a riot. I don't really want to call it a riot because the protesters were not being violent because the police fired tear gas. There's clips from that protest sort of gone wrong that I believe took place in Atlanta. In addition to that, there's point being, across the political spectrum, regardless of who you are, where you live, there has been an outcry of, there's been an outpouring of support, which, it's so nice to see, but where is it for the rest of them? It's not there because it's not convenient enough and it's not clear-cut enough, and either white people can't be bothered or they don't want to get involved because it's just a little bit politically charged. So, firstly, it's nice to see white people giving a crap for a change. Secondly, we hope that white people continue to give a crap when it is less obvious, although I doubt that will happen.
And this is echoed all the way up to the very top of the, U.S. political chain. So both Trump and Biden released statements in support of George Flynn. So Trump first, or George Floyd. Trump at first said, "At my request, the FBI and Department of Justice are already well into an investigation as to the very sad and tragic death in Minnesota of George Floyd. I've asked for this investigation to be expedited, and I greatly appreciate all of the work done by local law enforcement. My heart goes out to George's family and friends. Justice will be served."
It should be noted that we also appreciate the work done by local law enforcement, except for the work in question that was performed by local law enforcement.
Yeah.
So, again, hey man, Trump actually doing, I guess, the right thing. Celebrate the little things. Mm-hmm. At the same time, if I could be nitpicky, and I'm going to be nitpicky, local law enforcement has not had the best media week. So maybe don't say thank you, local law enforcement, for investigating the problem that you yourself created, et cetera, et cetera. However, this is Trump talking. It's definitely the best he could have done.
Yeah, especially in terms of Trump, this is a pretty good statement. Saying justice will be served is so typically when Trump takes sides on anything, he takes sides in favor of the law enforcement or the typical right side. But saying justice will be served is that's a pretty Black Lives Matter sounding statement. So it's
in that
one regard.
The verbiage, the vernacular, the connotation of the word justice is very, it is much more associated with progressives. Whereas on the right, it's all about
justice for George.
Exactly.
The hashtag is justice for George. It's there.
Whereas, typically on the right, we see a lot more focus with, discovering the truth, getting to the bottom of things, what actually happened. Because of course, that's the thing. Hoping for justice, objectively a good thing to do. Searching for the truth, objectively a good thing to do. But in America right now, that is politically charged. So getting to the bottom of it implies that we don't know what happened. So maybe, what happened is not so clear. But if you're using the language of justice, that in and of itself is kind of taking a side, even if it's taking a side in the most passive way possible.
And then on the other side, you have Biden, who released a much more politically charged statement compared to Trump's, who was a little more neutral. So Biden said, George Floyd's life mattered. It mattered as much as mine. It mattered as much as anyone's in this country. At least it should have. Watching his life be taken in the same manner, echoing nearly the same words of Eric Garner more than 5 years ago, I can't breathe, is a tragic reminder that this is not an isolated incident, but a part of an ingrained systemic cycle that still exists in this country. It cuts at the very heart of our sacred belief that all Americans are equal in rights and dignity. He also called for an FBI and independent DOJ investigation. So this is one of the rare cases where Trump and Biden agreed, which is especially surprising considering the field in which they agree. But those are their statements. Biden's much more taking language directly from Black Lives Matter, obviously saying George Floyd's life mattered.
Calling out his life, couching it in the language, reminding of Eric Garner. I can't breathe. Hopefully now will become a much more, even, I couldn't imagine that it would, but it will now become an even more visceral phrase, and that means so much, or hopefully will continue to mean so much in the, in the crusade for racial equality, which is not yet over.
Yeah.
But it's the tale of two statements. It doesn't, when Biden's statement is procedurally generated, written by aides, it could be the same thing at this point. But it sort of hits all of the key points that you want, and it does it in, a way that you would come to expect of somebody who's running for president.
Yeah. But in terms of statements to the Black community, Biden also had not the best in the Black community. Just a few days before all of this news came out, the main news of the day was also race relations, but that was Biden's "You ain't black" quote.
And it was Biden on the back foot race relations. So this is something that's kind of interesting, right? So when we were doing research to try and just give proper context to what happened, we found that it was really, really hard to find the full quote in its full context. So Eddie actually had to transcribe the proceedings of the interview. Every source we found had a very, very abridged version.
Yeah. So this is about the minute of conversation that happened. So a Biden staffer came up and was like, "Hey, I'm really sorry, but the vice president has to go." And Charlemagne says, "Hey, you can't do that to Black media," just kind of jokingly. Biden says, "I do it to white media. I do it to Black media. My wife has to go on at 6 p.m. Checks his watch and goes, I'm in trouble. And then Charlemagne says, "Look, you got to come see us when you're in New York, VP Biden." Biden says, "I will." Charlemagne says, "It's a long way to November. We got more questions." And Biden says, "You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or for Trump, then you ain't Black." Charlemagne says, "It has nothing to do with Trump. It just has to do with the fact that I want something for my community. I would love to see," Biden cuts him off, says, "Take a look at my record, man. I extended the Voting Act for 20 years. I have a record that is second to none. The NAACP has endorsed me every time I've run. I mean, come on, take a look at the record."
Oh my God. So
that's the actual context. So
that's the full context. And it's going to be really, really easy for the Trump campaign because when Biden was saying, I've got more questions, but I tell you, like he said it, like there was a bit of aggression in his voice. I don't think he meant it, but
it was
like you can definitely edit it so that it appears that way.
The way what Charlemagne was actually saying was not about, as he said before he was cut off, that he wasn't saying that it was, oh, he has more questions about who he's going to vote for. He had more questions to ask Biden about black policy and things like that. So it was a misinterpreted question that he way misresponded to.
And he responded to it. Okay, look, I understand like chest beating your record, right? But come on. This is such an overdone thing. I did all this stuff for black people. Look at my record that I've done stuff. Like I understand, okay? We know that you've done a lot of stuff for black people, but it's not about what you've done. It's about what you're about to do. That's the only time I'll ever quote Tom Brady on the show. But it's really important because it's true. It doesn't matter what you did for black people 20 years ago. It matters what you're going to do for black people when you are president, if you are president. So, like,
if you
defending yourself by using your record is, like, I get that it might make sense on paper, but we've seen it for so long and it's so overdone.
If you look at their full interview, what Charlemagne had been pressing him on the whole time is, what are you going to do if you're elected? Like, the crime bill was bad. It has adversely affected the African-American community. You championed that bill. What are you going to do to overturn the effect of that bill? What are you going to do to end the war on drugs, or to make the war on drugs at least racially equal? Because it has it has over affected African-American people way more, especially than it's affected white people, but any other people of color also.
Oh yeah. So Charlemagne, after the interview, he says, I think to something on Twitter, or maybe he was still on air, he says, "We have been loyal to Democrats for a long time, we African-American community. Black people have invested a lot into that party, and the return on investment has not been great," he wrote. As Biden said in our brief interview when I asked him if Dems owe the black community, absolutely was his answer. So let's see what you got. Votes are quid pro quo. You can't possibly want me to fear Trump more than I want something for my people. Yeah. And that last sentence is absolutely genius.
Mm-hmm. It really is just pointing out the problems in Biden's reasoning, just saying, look at my record. What Biden was arguing is, I'm better than Trump. I'm less bad than Trump is. Look at my record. I've helped people in the past.
But it's not about being better than Trump. It's about being the best version of yourself. And Charlemagne perfectly calls that out in the last sentence. You can't want me to just vote for you because I fear Trump. You want me to vote for you because I want to vote for you as doing something for my people. It's such a different mentality, and it makes the difference.
And it's also important that he, in a less explicit way, is calling Biden out on his relations and on his history, because what Biden was saying is, take a look at my record. What Charlemagne is saying is, our return on investment has not been very great.
Exactly.
So, like, sure, Biden supported a lot of racial reforms, but he also supported the crime bill. He also was part of the main reason that Anita Hill was so attacked when she was testifying against Clarence Thomas. Like, Biden does not have a perfect record. He has a good record generally, but like, his record is not perfect, and his record is not as good as he thinks it is.
And even if he did have a perfect record, the record is not what you should be running on.
So what?
Exactly. So let's go into Biden's record a little bit more, and maybe that will lead us down the road that we want to go a little bit, because because if Biden really cares about getting out the vote, right? Black people being represented in the polls, he has to give black voters a reason to show up, not just a reason not to vote. And so, what do black people want?
The thing that irked me more than his actual "You Ain't Black" quote in that interview and in that clip is Charlemagne seeing, I want something for my community. I would love to see, and Biden cutting him off and saying, look at my record. Because obviously, I can't speak on behalf of the Black community. I'm a straight white male that lives in a rich suburban neighborhood. So I'm not the person to say this directly. But typically, what African American voters want is the same thing that white voters want. They want to be heard, and they want things that will actually benefit them. They don't just want to know, like, and especially in a community that has been so historically and systemically segregated against and disenfranchised in the African American community. You know, what people are calling for now, like even just look at like comments on Instagram and social media posts. People want an end to the war on drugs. They want legalize or decriminalization of marijuana. They want to free nonviolent drug offenders, free housing, equal opportunity in education and hiring, awareness and education and reform, and action taken on police violence. Those are the things that people want. They don't care about they don't care about what has happened in the past as much as they care about there are still problems that need to be fixed.
Yeah, that actually is a really good point. I think that's something that fundamentally a lot of white politicians and a lot of white people are kind of, it's like a disconnect where a lot of white politicians, white people look at that and it's like, fundamentally at the end of the day, it's like, oh, are they butthurt about racism? Are they butthurt about slavery? First of all, of course they should be. They deserve to be.
Yeah,
but
rightfully so.
That's much beside the point, because there is white guilt, there is white fear about how Black Americans feel about the past. And here is a perfect example of Black media, Black Americans speaking up and saying, yeah, the past happened, and we care about it. But at the end of the day, we are in this because of what is going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah.
And that's such a fundamentally different track than a lot of white politicians approach, because a lot of white politicians, when they're giving statements, speeches, whatever, whenever it comes to race relations, it's always couched in the context of the horrible past, not in the context of a hopeful future.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, again, what a good Biden platform would be is something that is about, actually pushing forward and looking for more civil rights and more equality in our society. And that's something that not even like it's not easy. It's not easy at all. Even Obama struggled. I mean, there were not many major civil rights reforms in the African American community that happened under Obama's tenure. The most significant civil rights reform was the legalization of gay marriage, which wasn't Obama's doing. That was the Supreme Court. So, civil rights reform is obviously not easy, but it has to be done. And you cannot just rely on your past record of civil rights reforms. You have to be continuously pushing if there is a community that is continuously being disenfranchised, as we have seen with the African American community recently.
Mm-hmm. And
especially in the past few weeks with all this police violence, and especially with this bipartisan, completely, fully American outrage at George Floyd's death.
Yeah. So, what is Biden going to do? What's the most obvious thing Biden's going to do? So let's get political here. This is an election podcast. It's the VP.
Yes.
So
before we get to VPs, let's talk about just a few more things. So the immediate impact, a lot of people were like, this is the end. Right. Biden's campaign. This is Biden's basket of deplorables right here.
Which it definitely wasn't.
Which it really kind of wasn't. So right afterwards, the Breakfast Club, which is Charlemagne's group, I don't know exactly how to describe it, but
it's his. I think it's his show.
Yeah. So he published a poll that got 100,000 plus responses. That was pretty much like, do you agree with what Vice President Biden said? And almost 90% said, wait, what? No.
No.
So, pretty much everyone, rightfully so, was like, that's a bit of an absurd statement to make. But then over time, the next few days, you saw kind of people calming down about it. Jim Clyburn, who's a pretty notable Black congressperson.
Notable for making Biden the nominee. Notable.
Yeah. But also just like a pretty influential African-American congressperson. said, he's not too upset about the statement that you need to compare Biden to the alternative, not the almighty.
Which, again, it comes back to the fundamental thing that we are constantly pushing back and forth. Mm-hmm. Are we going to treat Biden as the alternative, or are we going to treat him not necessarily as the almighty, but are we going to treat him as something other than the alternative? And it is not so clear cut.
What you hear, I can hear Charlemagne's voice in my head saying, well, we don't care about the alternative. We want something done. Like, they want justice. But
you can also step back and say that is the alternative.
Yeah. Ultimately, this probably won't be that impactful in his campaign, regardless of whether or not it should be. These are just looking at 2 economist polls back to back, so that way we're getting equal sources. Before the "You ain't black" comment, the African American community supported Biden over Trump 76-9. After the poll, this poll happened about a week after the comment. It was 75-10. So it was a literal 1% difference in voting, and ultimately, I think that's probably going to correct itself. And by correct itself, I mean go back to where it was, not necessarily to say that that's where it should be.
Especially in light of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, because visceral happenings, visceral tragedies like that kind of can really refocus people's attention away from, words.
Yeah. And then one last bit of polling. It's just a little bit of Rasmussen being Rasmussen. They polled about the "You ain't black" comment, and their big headline was only 27% of black voters agree with Joe Biden's comment. But just like any poll, you need to look into how they actually ask the question. Here's how Rasmussen asks the question. Do you agree or disagree that a black voter who votes for Donald Trump instead of Joe Biden is not really black? Which is a very...
So loaded.
It's a very loaded, very insidious way of asking that question. But here's the interesting thing.
Yeah.
So, here's the interesting. 27% of black voters said that they disagree, that you're black regardless of who you vote for. But that's almost double what the general voting public said, which was 14%. So, comment was bad, but the fact that black voters agreed twice as often as the average voter agreed with that statement is telling of a sorts that, regardless of how not politically correct that comment was to make, there is some underlying truth to the feelings behind that statement. That's the best way to say it.
Even if there is an underlying truth, there's an underlying current of some people might believe that.
Yes. I mean, 27% of black voters, that's 1 out of 4.
Yeah, so that's a solid chunk to me.
Yeah, person
statistically
in every house.
Significant. Yeah, actually. That's a great way to put it.
The ultimate backlash to all of this Charlemagne went on a few other interviews and calls after this, and he said the one thing that Biden could do to make up for his comment is choose a black VP.
Yeah.
Biden actually, he had brought this up to Biden. Biden said he was considering multiple black women as his vice presidential nominee. So now let's move into who we might be considering for VP. We know some, and we have rumors of others, but ultimately there's about 10 that we can assume he's probably considering.
And the thing with VP is that there's always a strategy behind it. There's never... Well, there should be a strategy behind it. I can think of one particular example where it didn't seem like there was any strategy behind it. Hillary. But usually it's pretty clear what the campaign is going for when they pick their VP. So Obama, Biden in 2008, trying to shore up the Rust Belt, right? Because Biden, Scranton, et cetera, et cetera. Trump, Pence, shoring up the Rust Belt.
Rust Belt conservatives, Christians.
Making sure that Indiana is red, and probably Ohio as well.
It was making up for Trump's less Christian conservative comments.
Yeah. So there's a clear strategy. And so when you are trying to guess who the VP is going to be, then you have to look at the potential voter base, the potential states that campaign is looking to secure or to flip, and then say, based on what the campaign needs, who is going to be the vice president. So let's go down that road.
Yeah, so we're just going to start off listing the 10 people that could be the VP. Obviously, there are some other ones that haven't been necessarily brought up, but these are the 10 most likely, most talked about people. So Amy Klobuchar, as we mentioned last week, is undergoing vetting. Tammy Duckworth is in interviews right now, confirmed by her Senate counterpart, Dick Durbin. Michelle Lujan Grisham is undergoing vetting papers. Gretchen Whitmer is in talks to begin the vetting process. Val Demings is on the short list. Maggie Hassan is undergoing vetting. And then in terms of other people, Jim Clyburn said that Keisha Bottoms would be a good vice presidential candidate. And then Stacey Abrams has consistently been in the picture, as have Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren.
Sort of floating as the Vegas favorites.
Yeah. So let's talk about them one by one here.
Right. So,
and where they might fit into that strategy.
Right. So let's start off with, well, maybe, so do we want to talk candidates or do we want to talk strategy? Because
let's talk strategies first.
Yeah, because I think there's a few, to me, I see that there's like 3 strategies, like 3.5. So let's start off with the first one, because before this week happened, it seemed to be the way that Biden was going, if we believe the rumors on Klobuchar is sort of like at the head of the pack, which is driving up the turnout for white, college-educated suburban women. That's what happened.
2018 strategy.
Exactly. It's what happened in 2018 and generated some pretty solid success for House Democrats in that election.
It was one of the biggest House pickups of all time. So, especially with the current president, where a lot of white suburban college-educated women really, really do not like Trump, picking a candidate that appeals to them can bring that turnout up and can bring turnout up for the Democrats.
Exactly. So who might those main candidates be? Klobuchar, Warren, Whitmer, and then so
Maggie Hassan also.
Maggie Hassan. So those are the 4 obvious ones. I think Kamala Harris would drive up turnout among certain white women. And I think Tammy Duckworth would do quite well in that category as well, like at face value.
Yes. I think Duckworth would actually do pretty well among college-educated and non-college-educated people, considering veterans especially get a little boost in electoral politics, and her being a disabled veteran is especially good. But also, Tammy Duckworth is just a great candidate with a very good record.
So anybody who can make Mitch McConnell change the Senate rules is a solid candidate, in my opinion. So that actually, good segue, brings us to option 2. White, non-college educated, both men and women. So Biden obviously does about as well as a Democrat can do among white, non-college educated people. But those people, they are Trump's base. And Trump has already said that he's not trying to bring in anybody new. He's just trying to expand his base. So if Biden can either, 1, stop him from expanding his base, or 2, drag some voters away from his base, that might be a way to take back some of the Rust Belt states. So let's talk about those candidates. Right away, Tammy Duckworth shoots to the top of that list as well.
I mean, Klobuchar in some respects is.
Klobuchar, Midwestern mom, Yeah,
Whitmer, again, same thing.
Whitmer slightly less so, because she has been quite belligerent with the president.
On top of that, those are mainly the 3 that are the biggest. Everyone else kind of fits that 3rd category,
which is
that you're talking.
Turning out the regardless of where they live, the votes of black men and black women all across the country. It's
and Hispanic men and women. It's black
and Hispanic, right? Black and Hispanic.
Black and Hispanic men and women.
But I mean, specifically, the black vote is what got Biden the nomination, the presumptive nomination, whatever. So going with that strategy, that's fundamentally what propelled Obama in 2008 and 2012. And unless we're saying that the black support for Democrats has regressed since 2008, which there's some evidence that it has, then that's sort of the strategy that the campaign should be going for again. And this is where all of these black women VP candidates come in.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about the black vote strategy, and I kind of cringe to myself saying black vote because it's a phrase that's so commonly used to refer to the African American community as a whole. So let me clarify. When I say black vote, I mean the community of African American voters that leans left, which is a large section of the African American voting populace in America, but not by any means all of it.
Yes.
So that said, the interesting thing about that strategy is that instead of focusing on specific states like most vice presidential picks do with like Mike Pence or even with like Joe Biden, where you're working on Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin,
right?
The African American, how do I phrase this?
African American communities, populations.
Yeah, trying to increase Democratic turnout among African American voters is something that would hypothetically work across all states, and that's why you saw 2008 Obama have such a sweeping victory, picking up like the Carolinas also and Indiana, and these states that you would never think would typically go Democrat, especially now, could go Democrat because if you actually have a person that excites African American voters and gets more than usual out to the polls, that's where that strategy can be very successful. But it's risky because if that strategy is not very successful, then you risk an even worse loss.
Exactly. And this is where we come into it, right? So I want to go through some of the pros and cons, because there are clear pros, and let's start with the sort of the generating black voter turnout. Mm-hmm. There's some clear pros and there's some clear cons with that one. That I definitely think is the most risky strategy. And here's why. So pro, you can pick a candidate and it's not as important what state they're from. So for example, Stacey Abrams would be a fantastic candidate for increasing black turnout. It doesn't matter that she's from Georgia, because that's something that's going to resonate across the country. You don't have to, it will resonate in Michigan just as much as it will resonate in Georgia. So in that way, you can cover a lot of ground, which is a really solid thing to do. That I think is the biggest pro. And also the fact that having a black woman would be historic. That's another pro that we often don't talk about. Major con. The key states that are turning do not have particularly high African-American populations.
Other than Michigan. Michigan has a high African-American population because of Detroit, but other than that, Milwaukee is not a typically high black population city. When you think Milwaukee, most people probably don't think African-American people in a large percentage of that population.
Pennsylvania, I mean, it's Philly, but not a particularly high rate. And the story gets worse the further west you go, with the exception of Michigan. Ohio, I think Indiana is lost, honestly. But Ohio, not particularly high.
Again, outside of the cities, there's not a high African American population in any of those, including Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota, outside of cities. The other big question that I have with the black turnout strategy is not necessarily a problem with the Biden campaign, but more with the DNC as a whole. That is, where are all the black women in the DNC? There are very few. So, just looking at that short list, it's Val Demings, Stacey Abrams, Kamala Harris, and Keisha Bottoms. Which out of those who are household names, probably two, Kamala and Stacey Abrams. Keisha Bottoms is not a very well-known person, and Val Demings is only really well-known among people who are very politically active, since she was pretty involved in the impeachment hearings. Right. So, that's kind of a big problem. So I was looking into it, and I was like, well, where, are there African-American representatives in those pivotal states? Yes is the answer, but the problem is they are not given many opportunities. So in Michigan, I'm talking about people of color, not necessarily African-American women specifically, but Brenda Lawrence and Rasheeda Talib are both people of color. Gwen Moore in Wisconsin, Joyce Beatty and Marcia Fudge in Ohio, Robin Kelly and Lauren Underwood in Illinois, Ilhan Omar in Minnesota, and Alma Adams in North Carolina. All people of color in the House. Now, with the exception of Rasheeda Talib and Ilhan Omar, who are part of the squad, none of those are really household names except for outside of the district in which they represent. But like Gwen Moore, she's been in the House since 2005. She's been in the House since when since when Al Gore was a household name that people talked about.
Oh, and man.
She's
not a high-ranking member, though.
She's on one committee. She's in Ways and Means, which is a pretty prestigious committee, but she's mid-ranking. She's been in the House for 15 years, and she's a mid-ranking member of the committee. All the people that are in charge, old white men. And that leads to just a problem with the DNC as a whole, that a big problem with the strategy in Congress of awarding people committee assignments based on tenure of office is that it disenfranchises people, especially when fewer women and fewer African Americans are elected and reelected to Congress because of the racial prejudices in America. And that's actually something, was not planning on talking about this, but that term limits would solve, because then you wouldn't have seniority system. So, it's something that's interesting that the DNC, because their system is spread out the way it is, there are people who were elected to the House in like the 80s and 90s, or some even earlier that were elected in like the 70s, that are still that have been in the House for 50 years, and because of that are guaranteed to lead committees.
Case study, because I'm calling him out now because I'm annoyed that I haven't gotten an email back. So the case of Mike Doyle, my personal representative, not a particularly bad representative. I think he's pretty good. He's been around for 7 terms, something like that, if not more. He's been around through 2 statewide redistrictings. So he is, entrenched. Now, that's not to say that Mike Doyle is a bad representative, as I said before, but it stifles up-and-coming talent. I bring this up because there is a woman primarying Mike Doyle by the name of, I don't know her first name, last name Dickinson. That's killing me. But this is a woman of color who is primarying Representative Doyle, and she stands no chance because he's entrenched.
Yeah.
That's what happens.
So another interesting thing, the current chair of the Ways and Means Committee is Richard Neal. He's Massachusetts representative, and his first post in elected office was in 1983. He was the 50th mayor of Springfield, Massachusetts. 1983 was also the 15th year since a Black woman was elected to Congress for the first time. So there's a 15-year difference from the first African-American woman being in Congress and the current chair of the Ways and Means Committee being elected to Congress or being elected to office. That's like such a small difference compared to how long he's been in office.
Yeah.
It's not.
It explains the problem that the Democrats are having, which is, why is it so hard to find a vice presidential candidate that seems to check all the boxes? And it's like, well, because Black women meet an important criterion, but they have not been given the time, the opportunity, or the space to become nationally relevant. And those who have become nationally relevant have become so either at the expense of other qualities or through, otherwise unrelated methods that might not have anything to do with them being a qualified vice presidential candidate. I should just say that I'm calling out Kamala and Stacey Abrams at this point because that's basically what I'm talking about. Kamala and Stacey Abrams being the 2 most recognizable women of color who at least people are talking about Biden selecting, or Vegas has Biden selecting.
Kamala Harris is the only Black woman in the Democratic Party with a track record that is comparable to that of former presidents.
All right, I want to talk about Kamala for a second, because Kamala right now, the experts say that Kamala is the favorite. So I want to talk about Kamala Harris, because sure, she was never 3 months ago, she was never going to be the vice president. Today, that is not such a certain thing, because Kamala Harris is the only candidate I can think of who is both a woman of color and who I personally think has a lot of potential for appeal among white college-educated women. Stacey Abrams would also do quite well among white college-educated women, but Kamala Harris's degree of experience and
name
recognition and her poise in interviews, I think would make her very successful among that particular demographic in a way that none of the other women of color that we've mentioned, except for maybe Tammy Duckworth, would resonate. Resonate.
I have said on the show before, I'm not personally a fan of Kamala Harris, but the reasons I'm not a fan of her are not the reasons that a Republican might be not a fan of her. So the reasons I don't like her are that I feel like she wasn't consistently progressive enough as Attorney General of California, but I don't feel like Republicans are going to get too upset about Kamala Harris enforcing the law stricter than Democrats wanted her to.
So are we treating white college-educated women as Republicans now, who are being
no? What I'm saying is that there is a fear that if you elect too progressive of a candidate, it could scare away moderate-leaning Republican voters. But that's not necessarily. Stacey Abrams is a lot more progressive on policy than Kamala Harris is, and a lot more progressive in her history than Kamala Harris is during her time as she was Speaker of the Georgia House, right? Or
Correct.
at least she was Minority Leader.
Let me take that logic and flip it a little bit.
Yeah.
Is having a former prosecutor with skeletons in her closet that are well documented by the news and specifically black media, is that going to scare away black voters?
Again, it's possible, but I think if Kamala and Biden both do not focus on their past, but focus on the future and focus on what they will do, as Biden should have been doing and should do now, if Kamala does the same thing, I think there's room for improvement and room to actually get out that African-American vote.
Final question.
Yes.
Kamala's passed. What do we do about the first debate?
Yeah, that's a big problem. So,
yes,
because Kamala very as directly as you can go while still being indirect. Yeah, as directly as you can be without still being indirect. Kamala called Joe Biden racist.
Yes, there you go. What do we do with that? That was on live TV. That wasn't in an interview. That wasn't out of context.
That clip, that girl was me, which Kamala was selling merch of, by the way.
Yeah.
That's not going to go away. That's going to be something that the Trump campaign uses to try and suppress the black vote and try and what's the word I'm looking for? Like disincentivize African Americans to go out and vote for a Democratic candidate and just try and keep them kind of, because
passive. Kamala Harris is not real in the way that Stacey Abrams is. And you can say, oh, you're just saying that because she's a progressive. Nah, Stacey Abrams is an incredibly gifted speaker, and she can really, like, she can touch the people that she's speaking to. That's why she's been such a success.
Yeah. Kamala gives off wine mom energy.
Yes.
Stacey Abrams does not give off wine mom energy. And that's why when Kamala tries to act, stereotypically culturally black, a lot of people are kind of uncomfortable with that because that's not the predominant energy that she gives off. It's very much not
exactly. Kamala Harris does not communicate, clearly has not been successful at relating to what most people would say is the black experience in America. And so at face value, who the experts say is somebody who checks these two like cardinally important boxes of turn out white women vote, which I think Kamala Harris would do. She would turn out white women because, as you said, wine mom energy. In the same way that Klobuchar is a Midwestern wine mom. Awesome. Mm-hmm. That same ability it's awesome. The color of her skin, and she can turn out white women. I actually think that is going to sort of take away from her ability to turn out African-American voters, because guess what? The color of your skin is not what matters. And I feel like a lot of people don't understand that. It's not the color of your skin. It's the experience that you portray and your ability to relate to the Black experience. And Kamala has not been able to do that.
This is not to say that Kamala ain't Black. That's not what we're implying.
Yeah, no, it's not that.
This is to say that part of the African-American community does not relate to Kamala Harris because she does not convey that she has had a similar experience to them.
Has she had a similar experience? We don't know. We're not her.
Yeah.
But that's not what we're saying. We're not saying that she hasn't had that experience. We're saying that is not something that she has been able to successfully convey herself. And that's why during the primary, she didn't poll well with African Americans who were being polled. That is important.
Polled the best out of any candidate, including Cory Booker and Kamala Harris.
So,
and among African American voters, Biden was the preferred candidate.
Exactly.
And had been the entire time. In terms of other African American women that could actually
we need to
consider, though, Val Demings. Val Demings is probably the other semi-known name on the list.
Val Demings, the third way. It's not Stacey Abrams. It's not Kamala. Let's get somebody who's got the best of both worlds, who has the qualifications of Kamala Harris, who has is a solid orator, but also definitely has shown that she can relate to the Black experience in the way that Stacey Abrams has been able to portray, like most Black female politicians.
So in terms of her background, Val Demings has been a rep for 5-10 years now.
It's all about time. She represents Florida 10, which is Orange County.
She's been, or actually, sorry, this is only her second term, but before that, she served a term as the chief of the Orlando Police Department, which especially now is very relevant, having a Black woman who was in charge of the police department.
Man, that seems like it checks every box. Which is it's such a cynical take to say, oh well, does the VP do the things that we're trying? But fundamentally, that's what we're trying to figure out. And she is a solid orator. She has executive experience. Being both a woman of color and a police chief is a really, really interesting dynamic.
So let's mention this. So according to the FBI, during her tenure from 2007 to 2011, in Orlando itself, there was a 43.6% drop in crime. She was also a 27-year veteran of the Orlando Police Department when she retired in 2011. So she has experience as a police officer. And she has dealt with police brutality charges in the past. And there actually is some controversy with the way she's done it. And, in some police brutality cases, there have been times where she's defended the officer and the jury disagreed. But she has experience with this exact situation. If there's any Black woman that can talk on both sides of the issue, it's her.
Mm-hmm.
It's her.
Which could be liberating. It could be, I think most people will look at it, will take those experiences and take that combination of factors positively. Definitely, this is the state of the left wing of the Democratic Party today. Having a former police chief as the VP will definitely give some of the, Bernie bros cause for concern, because the optics of a police chief is not exactly progressive. At the same time, not only was she incredibly successful police chief, but she is kind of everything else that a full-on progressive might want out of a VP candidate. Val Demings, everything we've said so far, awesome. I have a huge problem with her, though. If you're going with Val Demings as Val Demings, former police chief, woman of color who is a congressional representative. Awesome. She's a representative. She represents a district in Florida. And I am just not, I refuse to be sold on the idea that Florida is competitive. I don't think that the Democrats can win Florida, and I don't think that they will for some time.
My biggest fear with Val Demings is the same fear I have with Sally Yates, and that's I don't think you should choose someone who is most notable for their opposition to President Trump.
Yeah.
So Sally Yates, obviously fired by President Trump way back when, 20 years ago, it feels like. But Val Demings was also the main reason most people might know her name is because she played a significant role in the impeachment hearings. And again, just like that would immediately make impeachment an election issue. And impeachment was not a very popular thing.
Yeah.
Trump would be it would be very easy for him to give Val Demings like a nickname along that line of impeachment. And that could really, really hurt their chances in the future, having a candidate who's permanently associated with what was ultimately a not very popular impeachment.
Yep. So there is no right answer. There never will be a right answer.
There is not an ideal vice presidential candidate. Even if you
are going headlong toward one particular strategy, which candidate is best to execute that strategy, and which strategy would you go for? It's those two things are like constantly turning, and this week's events, to sort of bring it all back around, definitely change the dynamic of Biden's vetting team,
especially as we quickly draw closer to the DNC.
Yeah. So I want to hear your final take on this. Give me his best option for a VP and your prospective option. Who do you think he's going to pick?
Okay, so I think personally his best option is Tammy Duckworth. I think Tammy Duckworth has a good record, is semi-well known among political grognards, has a fun record also with her stories with Mitch McConnell. From what I've seen, is a really charismatic woman, great at interviewing, is a woman, is a person of color, is a veteran, is disabled, is a single mother, at least is a mother that is taking care of her child on the Senate floor. Like she's relatable to veterans, she's relatable to women, she's relatable to people of color. She checks a lot of boxes, and I think she'd make an excellent vice presidential candidate. In terms of who I think Biden's going to pick, before this week, I would have said Klobuchar. After this week, less sure, but I still think Klobuchar. I think
that's an awfully cynical take.
I still think. I think if he had even made that decision, he in my mind, Biden was all but decided on Amy. This happens, which means he just has to delay that decision a little bit until there's less outrage about him over the "You ain't black" comment, and until justice has been found for George Floyd, and until race relations kind of boil back down to the simmer they've been at for the past 10 years.
I wouldn't call it a simmer.
It's a pretty high simmer, but it's been the water's been just kind of bubbling for a while, and now it hit that boiling point, and it just needs to kind of go back down. But I think ultimately, because the DNC has the cards stacked against black women, I don't think that there's a black woman that, unfortunately, there's no black woman that hits all the marks.
So number one, I'll cheat. Tammy Duckworth, fantastic. Probably would be my preferred VP as well, with the slight caveat that she's from Illinois, so that doesn't do anything for you battleground state-wise.
It does and doesn't, because she's from Illinois, which, it's still a Midwestern state.
Yeah, and she can give that vibe and the veteran status. Like I just to be nitpicky, I think objectively Tammy Duckworth would be the most complete candidate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let me just clarify. She's not a single mother. That's my bad. She has 2 kids, though, one of whom she got Mitch McConnell to change the House rules so she could not only bring the child onto the floor, but breastfeed on the floor. And
we tend to bring that up a lot on the show, but
she also has a PhD. She has a BA and MA and a PhD and was in the military for 22 years. Great, amazing. Just, yeah. Anyways.
And great-grandfather fought in the Continental Army. That's a true thing, which is...
Yeah.
Anyway. All right, so Tammy Duckworth, solid. I'm just going to pick somebody else because I have to. So... other than Duckworth, I'm going to have to go with Stacey Abrams.
Okay. Solely
because there is turning out the black vote is incredibly important, and you can do that. And we often forget that, sure, Trump had a solid margin of victory, but a solid margin of victory in presidential elections is still a slim margin of victory. Getting people to show up in Philadelphia and in Michigan, even by just a little bit, will be incredibly effective. I think that unfortunately, as I said earlier, I think Florida's lost. And if we're giving up on Florida, which I honestly think is kind of strategic, Val Demings is off the list for me. So because of that, I think Stacey Abrams would be solid. I know she's got next to no experience. I know that her whole persona is based off of she almost did an amazing thing in Georgia once. But at the end of the day, she is a household name. She's an up-and-coming rock star, Obama-esque within the Democratic Party. And I think that it doesn't matter if she is not able to completely speak to college college-educated women, because she might not be able to speak to them in the same way that Kamala or Klobuchar might be able to, but she can still speak to them. Mm-hmm. And I think that she will generate that turnout enough that, combine that turnout with the overwhelming turnout that I predict would occur from the black vote, that will be probably the most successful option. Who I think it's likely he's going to pick, it's tough. It's really tough. The cynic in me says it's either going to be Kamala, which is going to be wild, or Klobuchar. I really don't want to say Kamala, because I do think it's likely that he goes with Klobuchar, but that's what's really hard, because I don't have a genuine opinion on this.
Yeah, it's a bit of a white bread ticket.
Yeah, that's the other thing. We learned that a white bread sandwich does not necessarily succeed.
No. Which is why I think it's important to note that none of us have mentioned Maggie Hassan very much at all.
Yeah.
Because she's a very, very, eccentric, good interviewer, everything, but she is from a swing state separate from all the other pivotal swing states. She's a former governor and a current junior senator. That description also perfectly fits Tim Kaine. She is a female New Hampshireite Tim Kaine, just with a little bit more charisma. But that's
How important is winning New Hampshire, though?
It's 4 electoral votes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maggie Hassan, I'm sure, would be great, but nobody knows who she is.
No.
Unfortunately. And that's where we come back to sort of this twisting conundrum.
With the DNC, yeah. The DNC not having a good representation system. But yeah.
Hopefully it's a more obvious week than next week is hopefully more obvious and we learn a little bit more, but we are getting closer and closer to the DNC. I mean, sure, it's about a month away.
A little bit more than a month, yeah.
Yeah, so at some point they've got to figure something out.
In about a month and a half, we'll be giving our coverage on the DNC in about 6 episodes.
6 episodes.
Yeah, but anyways, it is now 3:51 on this Thursday afternoon.
We're getting early
today, so our time is just about up.
Our intro and outro music is by Paul Abrams and Rock Solid Panda and produced by Elise Duda.
You can find a recording of this podcast on our YouTube channel, Catch 52, as well as our Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, anywhere you listen to your podcasts. Make sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Stay up to date on air times, episode topics, clips, and any upcoming guests we might be having.
We welcome your comments, your feedback, and your suggestions. And as always, have a good Friday and a great weekend.